Growth Pains.
Hi everyone, welcome to this new episode of Growth Pains. Today we'll be talking about topics such as dealing with imposter syndrome, keeping up with professional social media, balancing short-term and long-term initiatives, and measuring brand marketing efforts. My guest today is Karishma Rajaratnam. She's normally based in Toronto, but she's joining us today from her home country of India. She got stuck there during the pandemic. Karishma recently joined as the head of growth for ChartMogul, a much-loved tool in the SaaS world. And she used to be before in another one that is a classic in the SaaS world, which is ChargeBee for almost 5 years. And now she also advises early-stage startups as a mentor at Techstars. So I'm really happy to have you, Karishma. How are you?
Thanks so much, Ignacio. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm doing good, thanks. How are you doing?
Really good, really good. Amsterdam, it's as I was letting you know, like kind of stormy and all over the place, but overall, I think I don't know. It's just what it is. Let's get right away to it. We have a little bit of a true or false at the beginning of this, so I hope you're ready. Most of these are going to be around growth marketing, which is your specialty. So, as the head of growth in a B2B business, you call the shots across the entire funnel. Marketing, sales, and customer success should understand that. True or false?
I'd say false. I think it's a very collaborative thing with marketing, sales, and customer success. Even though growth is a super broad term, I think to be successful in the role, you need to be able to collaborate with other leaders across the funnel. So I'd say false to that one.
Absolutely, I was hoping you'd say that. So good. Let's go with the other one. Experimentation tempo, it's crucial. The faster you experiment, the more likely you are to grow. True or false?
Absolutely true. I think getting into that growth mindset to run experiments fast and learn how to fail fast as well is extremely important, regardless of which role you're in inside of a fast-growing startup.
Do you think though sometimes like this can lead to people a little bit obsessing about the tempo, and all of a sudden they just start testing things that are not even worth testing to begin with?
I think that's a definite danger. I think before deciding what experiment to run, there needs to be some kind of research into why running that experiment is important, and also like a prioritization matrix, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible. It's very easy to take on like 100 things, but not necessarily see them to completion. So it's important, I think, when you're balancing so many things in a fast-growing startup to pick your battles and pick the ones that are going to move the needle the most. And I think once you get into that prioritization mindset to pick the problems which will, which if you solve them will impact the business the most, then running experiments to solve that problem is like the right approach to take it forward.
Absolutely. Okay, good one. So next one, most growth teams over-engineer marketing. Keeping things simple pays off.
Absolutely, again. So this might be, I think, contradictory to the experiment point which we just had, but I also do think that at the same time, it's really important to keep things simple. And I think marketing, like if you go back to like some of the best marketing campaigns we've seen historically, they have been extremely simple concepts. It's just creative minds that have been put to the test and come up with really like interesting ways to, solve a particular problem or like come up with a specific campaign. So I think simplicity is really important.
Okay. Yeah, because we all get obsessed about like becoming scientists all of a sudden, and you forget about that people, our audience doesn't perceive it that way, right? Our audience is much simpler than our complicated MarTech setups that we are pushing that message.
Absolutely.
With,
Exactly. I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, your customer is a person, right? And so to be able to relate to them, you need to be able to think like you're speaking to a person, and simplifying things really helps with that.
Okay, last, let's see. In SaaS, the sales-led approach is old news. Product-led is the only way forward. True or false?
What was that? Product-led is? Sorry?
Okay, so in SaaS, the sales-led approach is old news, and product-led is the only way forward. True or false?
Got it. False. I strongly believe that product-led, like sales-led approaches are not dead. Like I think most SaaS companies come to a point where, if they are super successful with running product-led approaches, they can hit a wall with just product-led approach alone, right? At some point, you do need human beings assisting the funnel, especially as you sell to mid-market customers and sell to like larger deal sizes. you're going to be dealing with multiple buyers inside of an organization, and you need to be able to have one person who brings all these buyers together to close a particular account. And so I think it's super important for most SaaS companies today to have a product led approach and have a strong product led approach, but also have a sales team that really complements that and have these two motions kind of working together well.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely agree. I added that in because I feel like, when there's a new kid in blog, in this case, like product led growth or whatever is trending these days, RevOps, whatever we want to call it, everybody's into it and
Yeah.
everybody's like, hey, this is the way, everything else is the past, right? So no more funnels. Now it's flywheels and all of this kind of like collective madness. And we tend to forget that
Yeah.
like it's a combination of everything. It's not one or the other, right? So that I thought it was super
Yeah.
interesting to highlight.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think in SaaS, generally people tend to take like opinions, these like very definitive opinions on like what's new and what's hot. And we tend to
Yeah.
believe that like, okay, this is the way forward. But I don't think that's necessarily the case because it a lot of these marketing techniques are completely unique to each individual business, right? So what works for me as a playbook may not work for somebody else. And I think it's totally fine. And we need to embrace all these different ideologies and figure out like, which one works the best for us and our business.
Yeah, also a lot of these are just rebranding, right? Like if you look at all of these things, like there's nothing truly new. Like we've always made like good onboardings and products that would serve people, right?
Yeah,
All of a sudden somebody comes and says, I'll call this, I'll release a book about it. And it's like a new thing, right? Conversational marketing, RevOps, all of these kind of
right.
terms that go around. But there's nothing really new in that mix, right? And if you just go crazy over it and apply it without thinking, then you just end up like not adding a lot of value. Okay, so
Absolutely.
let's get to the first question to start on the pains topic. So I want to start with something that you are really really bad at when it comes to your work. What's the top of your head?
So I think this one is super recent. I mean, considering the pandemic and everything, but I think like I'm finding it super hard to keep up with all the social kind of things that companies organize apart from work. I think
Uh
like
huh.
businesses are trying to do this because it's obviously like everyone wants to keep employees engaged, and it's really important to do that because when you're working remotely without an office where you can have a coffee with a colleague, it's like really it can be really isolating, right? And our bosses have it in our best interest to kind of get everyone together in different kinds of meetups
Yeah.
and even virtual events that happen. But like, I feel like I have so much Zoom fatigue now that I'm not able to keep up with that, and I wish that I could do it more because, especially as a team leader, you know that it's important to organize these things yourself for your team because it's important to have
Absolutely.
that face to face, because otherwise I think a lot of conversations just get to the point about work and there's no like room for interaction about anything else. So trying to balance that and get better at it.
Yeah, it's not all results, right? At some point, when you especially you started recently, right, and in your new job, and when you come in a new job, you want to show right away results and so on, and you tend to forget sometimes about that aspect, and it's one to keep up
Yeah,
with. You guys are
very
also
true.
remote, right? Most of you are remote at ChartMogul as well, so that's also one layer of challenge to that. Besides the pandemic, you just live in
Yeah.
different countries.
Yeah, exactly. Like one big thing for Chartmogul before was that like before the pandemic was, even though it was a fully distributed team, everyone would get together at one place, like either in Europe or somewhere else to kind of see each other and do like an annual retreat. And this year that was canceled because of the pandemic. So that's been like a bummer for everyone, because
Yeah.
there's been no opportunity, especially for the new hires, to meet each other. So we're hoping things settle down soon and we can do this.
All right. So when we were discussing your pains through email earlier, one of the things you mentioned, and this is something that we've touched upon in another podcast, but it's like imposter syndrome, right? And I think even though we briefly touch upon it, I wanted to go a bit deeper on this one. Also because it's from the side of a female that I think is also really interesting. Because mostly I talk about this with guys in previous episodes. So um, what's your story with imposter syndrome? Is that something that you've dealt with from like a long time, or is it something that you find recent?
Yeah.
What's the story with that?
I think it's definitely something that I've dealt with from a long time, like going back right to high school, right? Like not necessarily believing that I could, like, for instance, if there were things that I had to do on stage, in
Yeah.
front of a large audience, I used to have innate stage fright to get up there and like present any of my work. So that started in school. It got a lot better when I was in university and I was exposed to like more kinds of people and I, built up my self-confidence. But in the workspace, I think it manifested in a slightly different way where I think I would push myself to kind of not shy away from sharing my work and maybe, presenting publicly and things like that. But at the same time, at the back of your head, when you're in a high growth startup, I think it's very natural because your role keeps changing to question yourself,
Yeah.
right? And it's nobody's fault. It's just because the company is growing at such a fast pace, right? Like, so one day you're doing this job, and then the next day the company needs something else, and you're trying to wear this other hat, right? But it also means that you need to find people who can specialize in specific skills and hire them for that skill. And but in this whole like chaotic process, you do tend to question yourself and your skills, along the way.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think, like, if you're working with any fast growing startup, it's normal to feel that way. Also, because the borders have opened up, like, the talent is so great nowadays. And you feel like, hey, there are so many talented people out there. How am I going to kind of keep up in terms of my skill set and my ability to kind of share my work and things like that?
Yeah, that's interesting because one of the reasons that I started the podcast, right, was because also like a lot of people felt like that, and I could tell like when you do talks in public or whatever that people have this notion that everybody's so amazing, right, and that you stand on a stage and they're like,
Yeah.
wow, dude, you have all your stuff together, like you're really smart, and as a person, most of us don't really feel that smart, right, and you realize that a lot of people are struggling with that feeling. But what's interesting is that one of the advices that experts give to deal with imposter syndrome, right, is that you look objectively at your achievements, right? In your case, and what I found it so interesting that you told me this is that you've worked in companies, at least the last one as well, is very successful. ChargeBee recently raised a Series
Yeah.
F of 50 plus million, right? So do you think that being part of a successful business that's growing so fast
Yeah.
helped your imposter syndrome or actually made it worse, right? Because
That's, yeah.
I mean, it's not obvious. It seems like you would get like, oh, I'm doing a great job, but you also might get a little bit of like, we're doing great, but this is not really me doing this, is it? Right? Like so it might even make it worse.
Got it.
What's your experience with that?
That's actually a really, really good question. So I think that the experience with ChargeBee and the massive growth of the company has helped with this a lot personally for me. I think it can go the other way for some people,
Mm-hmm.
but for me personally, just that validation, over the last 5 years and just seeing the company grow and seeing a lot of your efforts actually come to fruition and being contributing to that success, I think that's built up my confidence a lot, and I've had a lot more confidence now than I did, say, 5 years ago before I started at ChargeBee. I think it was also the nature of like the people that I work with. Like the co-founders were such that they would always throw me in like these challenging situations and encourage me to like go in and shine there, and so that really helped. Like to have mentors or people who really back you and believe in you, I think really helps.
Mm.
But a lot of the struggles that I was facing actually had nothing to do with the company. It was more personal, right? So it would almost be like, hey, okay, if there's a new problem that I need to solve, I'd question whether I can solve it or not. Externally, I wouldn't show that, right? I tell our
Yeah.
co-founder, yes, I'm going to go solve it. But then internally, I'd be like a mental mess thinking like, oh God, like, I don't know if I can do this. And it was almost like in phases where, I would jump in, try to work on that problem. And if things work out well, like if I'm, succeeding in that phase or in that role, it kind of like my confidence would get built up again, right? So it's almost like ups and downs. I would say it's just rapid ups and downs.
Yeah.
The lows are like when you really have this imposter syndrome and question yourself. And then when something successful works out, it's then like a high. So it's a lot of highs and lows.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And when you mention it's also really true, right? Like I wouldn't show it to the outside. And that's so interesting because like even as much as we preach in companies, right? Like we have a culture to fail and we help our people,
Yeah.
whatever it is, we're always going to have our guards up, right? So it's not rare to be in a meeting where somebody's pitching a new project and 5 out of 6 people in that meeting room are actually not getting the half of what the people are saying, right? But they're all playing it cool and being like, oh yeah, we should, you know what I mean? Because we're
Yeah.
just so reluctant to let our guards down and to say like, I actually have no clue what this is. Like, I don't understand it. We prefer Googling it in our laptop while the meeting is running, right? Anything to not
Yeah.
say like, I actually am out of my depth here. I have no idea what this is. Have you
Yeah.
over the years gotten better at that and just saying like, guys, this is over my head?
Yeah, that's again a good question. So I think like personally at ChargeBee, like something that I also faced was that I was a younger member amongst the leadership team, and that intimidated me quite a bit sometimes. That
Yeah.
I think it's like uh, gender aside, I think age is more of a factor here where you're like, hey, maybe I don't know as much, right? And there were instances where I would honestly like clam up and not say anything in a meeting. Not necessarily because, I didn't want to participate, but it was more like that imposter syndrome working in, right? Like, do you actually, is what you're saying going to make sense in this meeting? Like, it's better just to like not say anything if you don't have something valuable to say. But I would walk out of those kinds of meetings feeling terrible, like, hey, I felt like I could have added value. Why not add value? And so those were kind of the phases that I had to work through and be like, okay, it's not an environment where you can't speak up. So why is it that you're kind of pushing yourself down? You need to be able to go in and speak up. I think I got better with that over time,
Yeah.
where I think especially towards the later stages, I started to speak up a lot more and learn how to deal with that myself.
Yeah, what's interesting is that most of us tend to think that what we do is really obvious, right? In marketing, nothing we do really is like rocket science, right? So nothing is something that you
Right.
would so everybody can have an opinion about the messaging you put in and out or whatever. Is this something is there something particular about your work that makes you feel like, "Oh, are you guys really paying me for this? Like this is like super obvious advice." Like because sometimes you feel like that, you know what I mean? Like what you're saying,
Yeah.
especially as a manager, right? It's like, "Hey, should we go with this or that?" And you're like, yeah, with this. And people are like, yeah, okay, cool. And you're like, was that a hard decision? Right. And you don't realize that it actually takes experience to make those decisions, right? It's just that you don't appreciate it in yourself. Do you feel like that sometimes? Like, really, you're paying me for this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I feel like that. I feel like this a lot with more public like talks and things like that I've been doing off
Yeah.
late, where a lot of the times I feel like, hey, is what I'm sharing really something that's going to be adding value? I mean, I may later get messages saying like, hey, this was super useful, and at that point I'm like, okay, that's when I pause and say, hey, it doesn't matter. I think you shouldn't overanalyze your skills, because what you know can always help someone out there, right? Because everyone's at different phases in learning in their career, and not everyone may be like in a very advanced phase.
Yeah.
And so if you're paying it forward by just talking about things that may feel more basic to you, but they could actually end up be adding a lot of value to someone else. But I do feel like, even outside of the context of work, when I'm doing some of these talks, I do feel like, hey, is this really of
Yeah,
value?
no, absolutely. Like, and one thing that's interesting with this whole growth marketing rise that's been in the last years, right, is that
Mhm.
I like some things that came with it. Obviously, I'm also in that sort of the discipline, but there's also some things that came with it that are not that great, in my opinion, right? So, one of the bad things is that there seems to be an idea. Probably the people that have been doing this longer, not anymore, but in people that are new to this, absolutely, that there's people are like one individual is like the chosen one that will ramp up your growth in your business. When in reality, as you mentioned earlier, it's always a very collective effort, right? But when people have this idea in an organization, uh, two things happen. If the company does really well, people can get really full of themselves and be like, "Ah, I can grow anything,"
Mhm.
right? When actually you just, yeah, I mean, it's a great product, right? And you would just was part of that team. And also, when it's not doing well, you can be really, really harsh on yourself, right? Because you can be like, "I was hired to grow
Yeah.
this product, and because of me, this is not growing." When in reality, it's so much more complex than that, right? Have you felt like this when you have taken on growth roles, managing teams?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is so important because in a growth role, I think it's never you operating in isolation, right? No matter how good or bad you may be at your job,
Yeah.
a lot of your success is dependent on other team members and other peers who can help you be successful in your role. And I think like you need to have a leadership team right when they're hiring, like right off the bat, who understand that a role within growth or within marketing is highly interdependent, and there needs to be alignment across other leadership and across like other peers inside of the organization
Yeah.
to ensure that like everyone's on the same page, that to succeed as a company or to succeed to hit like a specific revenue target, everyone needs to be rowing in the same direction and needs to be lifting each other up, right? If there's internal competition and everyone's trying to pull each other down, that's not going to work, right? And so it I think like having that mindset and understanding that like your success is not always in your hands is important. I think it's also important to like balance that with saying, hey, whatever is in within your control, you need to give it that 200%. So you when you walk away from it, you feel like, hey, I gave it my 200%.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you should acknowledge that giving it your 200% and seeing the results that you want to see are two different things, because seeing the results you want to see depend on other factors which may not be in your control.
But that's such a good exercise when we're talking about imposter syndrome, right? Because I think a big part of it, it's related to
Yeah.
like people bearing that weight on their shoulders and just being like, hey, like this is because of me. And yeah, often there are so many things we don't control, right? And I believe another important part of this, and you mentioned this at the beginning, it's comparing yourself to others, right? We live
Yeah.
in a I don't know, when I was a kid, I'm 36 now, and when I was a kid, my dad didn't have LinkedIn, right? He couldn't see if all of the other managers in his area were doing great or were moving companies, right? Like you were not
Yeah.
exposed to that stuff, right? So you were just like, I do my job,
Yeah.
I come home, I talk to my kids, and you didn't have that pressure. And that pressure has
Yeah.
leaked from our personal life into our professional life with like platforms like LinkedIn and
Yeah.
others. So everybody's writing articles, making podcasts, like myself. Everybody says that they're going to retire when they're 35 and exiting from a major IPO with a unicorn and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How much of a role of everybody claiming how amazing they are in social do you think has influenced your particular imposter syndrome? Do you think that has affected you hard, or is something that you're a bit immune to?
I think now I'm immune to it. Like now, honestly, it's like noise for me,
Yeah.
where it's almost a joke, right? Like I joke about it with my husband. Like we just like see it too often that it's like, it feels, LinkedIn almost sometimes feels like a hot mess that you kind of want to stay away from mostly. But like, I mean, not to say that there's great content. I think a lot of people who are posting content on LinkedIn, and like, for example, this podcast, right? I find a lot of great podcasts on LinkedIn. And so I wouldn't like diss the platform and say, hey, shouldn't post on LinkedIn. I do it myself. But I think it's like important to have that balance, because sometimes these posts can get very self-promotional,
Yeah.
and
We're going to touch upon
so
that.
so I
Yeah.
can't so I can tend to look at them with a little bit of cynicism sometimes. I'd say, like, honestly, this doesn't affect my imposter syndrome as much. It did, I think, initially when it started picking up. But sometimes, I guess, like sometimes now and then when you see an update, you might feel like, oh damn, that's working out really well for someone else.
Yeah.
I wish this could work out better for me. But like these are just natural things in life. I think everyone has their ups and downs. But I definitely think social media is a contributor for people generally to have lower self-esteem these days.
Well, so that's a perfect segue with the second pain that you mentioned, right? Which was keeping up with this social media in a professional way, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
not for your personal Instagram, but professionally. It is really hard to be an executor and an influencer at the same time, right? Like both of you and I, but
Oh my
you just said
God.
you're married. I'm married as well. Like if you want to have any life, there's just no freaking way of doing it, right? Like you are working all like 9, 10 hours a day, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you also are supposed to put out content every 2 minutes to start influencing. So that's very difficult. How do you cope with that pressure, or do you feel that pressure?
Honestly, this is yeah, it's I think it's a super complex thing. I feel like there's a big so there are different degrees of complexity when you consider people inside of I'm specifically speaking from the side of marketing.
Yeah.
So if you look at an individual contributor versus a manager, right? I felt like when I was an individual contributor, I had no time, right? Like I had literally no time to like go out there and like evangelize, what I was working on and things like that,
Yeah.
because I was just so busy heads down doing my work. And then when that role changed into a manager, and at ChargeBee, actually, the most recent role I held was one where it kind of was an evangelism role where I had to work a lot with startups and, advise startup founders and things like that. And so it almost became natural for me to have to start taking on a more public personality and like, start posting my work more often. And suddenly I realized, like, wow, there are a lot of things that I've learned along the way. If I had started posting, like, say, 5 years ago, I would have probably built up a following, like a
Yeah.
much larger following. But, taking it up now means that, but then I realized that, like, hey, I just didn't have time before, right? When I had a large team of 8 people working with me and, where everyone was sharing the responsibility, there became a lot more time for this. But before that, there was just no time. I think the complexity today is that like there's no option, right? Like it's almost like, hey, to be perceived as a successful marketer or to be like given that check mark, right? Like the green tick. You need to be able to like go out there and share your work, which can be super complex for people who are just too busy executing and want to actually produce good work for the organizations that they are employed by.
Yeah, that's interesting because like LinkedIn and our email inboxes and pretty much every channel, it's getting really, really noisy, right? And people are publishing a lot of
Yeah.
stuff. Some of it is worthless, some of it is really interesting. But often people also get into like, hey, the only way to be seen is to post every day. And to be honest with
Yeah,
you, there is no freaking way I would have something interesting to say every day. There's just no way.
exactly.
So then you end up
Yeah.
with a lot of bullshit being published and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
personally often feel like, you know what? I'm just gonna do my job. Screw this. If I do my job well, opportunities will find me anyway. I'm gonna just like not be on this stuff. But I do feel like, like I might be missing out on opportunities because you're simply not
Yeah.
visible. Do you subscribe to the idea that, as you were saying before, like it is pretty much a must to do this nowadays? Or do you think that if you do a good enough job, opportunities will always find you, regardless of you doing this or not?
I think it's important to keep up. To be honest, as cynical as I am about this whole thing, it's a little, it may be even a
It's a
little
dilemma we all
hypocritical because I
face.
do it
Yeah.
myself. Yeah, yeah. But I honestly think that it's important to do it, and especially from the perspective of being a woman, actually. So when I was at ChargeBee, we had our investor Shelley Perry come in and give a talk, and she was
Hmm.
talking about like how women have this tendency to just keep their heads down and type away, right? Like we're doing a great job, but we rarely ever raise our hand and talk about it and say like, hey, look at what I'm working
Yeah.
on, right? And I feel like social media has given us this, pretty cool opportunity to go out there and actually talk about some of the work that we're doing. And I feel like it's really important as a woman to do that because um, otherwise, I think you're going to hit a ceiling where men kind of continue to do it, right? You could be sitting down and keeping your head down,
Yeah.
but the man is still going to kind of raise their hand and keep posting on social media and get ahead, make a network because of that. One of the things that I think has been the most beneficial for me with social media is actually building a solid network, right? People that I can, lean on for help or assistance, or like if I'm looking for specific advice on something, I think social media has really enabled that for me. And I think it's important for women to have that network to kind of secure their own careers and grow up the ladder. So I would say I still think as much as annoying as it can be, I think carving out like a nice schedule for yourself where, you're not overdoing it. But you're still doing it enough that you're able to like, share what you're working on, share your successes.
Oh
That's
God, and
important.
it's challenging, right? It's like also that's where your imposter syndrome kicks in at full force, right? And you feel like everything you write it just sounds moronic, and you're like, oh God, do I really have to share
Yeah,
it? But I think honestly, yeah, I talked about this before in the podcast, but pretty much every episode I feel like it wasn't that great. And then usually you get nice comments, right? So I think the best advice is just like get yourself out there, get it done. Somebody will always think you're an
exactly.
idiot. It's unavoidable, right? And just live with that. It's fine.
Absolutely. And I would honestly look at it as a learning experience, right? It's
Yeah.
like writing. The more you write and the more you publish every day, you're going to get to be a better writer, and you're going to go figure out how to become a better writer, right? And so whether that's writing like, short like tweets, or whether that's actually writing a post where you're thinking deeply about, okay, what did I learn from this one thing that I did that would help somebody else? You're still using your brain and you're trying to figure out how to help someone else. And so I think there is a learning process in this whole thing if you don't overdo it and have the right intentions behind why you want to do it.
Yeah, for me, the biggest issue with social media, and I agree with you in everything you've said, but it's that most people, I believe, use it to brand themselves, as you were mentioning before, right? So it's all
Yeah,
about preaching how to
yeah,
do things. Like I rarely see somebody going in and saying, "Hey, I have no clue what I'm doing. How do I set up my AdWords account?" Right? That usually is like that direct message, because if you put it out there, you're gonna look
yeah.
like an idiot, right? And there's what I see the most is like, "Hey, this is how I do it because I'm so cool. So this is how you kill growth with your amazing setup." Right? So everybody's preaching how
Hmm,
amazing they are more than
hmm.
really engaging in like, hey, why don't we help each other out? I'm struggling with this. All that happens internally, and what happens outside and is visible for everybody is like, hey, I'm so cool. Check this out. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you what do you how do you feel about that? Because in a way, we all want to seem smart and we all want to seem like we have our stuff together. But the most value we can probably get from these platforms is asking, and is saying like, "Hey guys, I don't know about this. Do you guys know a good person that can help me with this?" Have you tried that at some point? I maybe in Twitter this is more common than it is on LinkedIn. How do you feel about being vulnerable in terms of not knowing stuff publicly?
Yeah. So I think it differs platform to platform. I feel like the if you go back to like the foundations of LinkedIn and why LinkedIn even exists as a platform, it's to promote yourself professionally or to like find your next perfect gig, right?
Yeah.
It's like a recruiter platform. You're on it because you want to look like good to all the potential recruiters out there and so on. And so I feel like there's a little, there's it's so much more fake than even like Twitter because you are trying to keep your best foot forward. And because recruiters or like
Yeah.
potential like managers at your new company are looking at what you're posting, you definitely don't want to feel vulnerable, right? And so I think that's why we probably see this a bit more in LinkedIn versus Twitter, where I still feel like a lot of the conversations, it still feels like an echo chamber sometimes, Twitter, to me personally.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of the conversations can still have good takeaways because the intention of Twitter was not to be about promoting your career, but it was meant to be about having good conversations, right? So I do find good stuff like good threads, AMA threads on Twitter.
Mm.
I would also say like a lot of good stuff happens in private communities. So this is really interesting because it goes back to your point about being vulnerable. I think people are more comfortable being vulnerable inside closed groups, right?
Right.
That's just human nature. You don't want to appear like you don't know anything in front of a large group versus when you're with a close set of people who you feel comfortable with. And so I feel like a lot of these good conversations happen in like private Facebook groups and so now we see a lot of independent communities being set up. I'm part of one called Forget the Funnel, which I just joined last week. It's a group for SaaS marketers.
Yeah.
And it's super helpful because like it's very honest. People actually talk about the struggles that they're facing inside of their company and get advice from other marketers on how to deal with those obstacles. Often some of this stuff is confidential and you can't even say it on a public platform, right? And so the good stuff I think really happens or like the really useful conversations happen in these private forums.
Yeah. What's interesting is that there's just so much, like we've been talking about putting out your own content, right? But what about keeping up with other people's content, right? Like it's the FOMO that this generates, right? Like I'm starting to
Yeah.
make peace by now with the fact that I just cannot catch up with everything I'd like to. Like my book list is just endless. I'm gonna finish up reading when I'm 89. So at some point I feel like, hey, I would prefer just putting my time in like creating than in consuming,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then you also
Mm-hmm.
get that FOMO of like, yeah, but there's this great article everybody's talking about and I haven't read it, so I'm missing out on learning on whatever. Do you also get that FOMO, or is that one that is already a bit more under control in your case of like, I'm okay if I don't read every article that's out there?
Yeah, I do get that FOMO. I think I definitely, in SaaS especially, there's like a lot of obsession around like keeping up with all the latest books that are out there, and for good reason. I mean, you can learn a lot from books, but I also often feel like a lot of these things can't be prescribed, right? What an author is writing in a book, it's meant for you to think about it and take away like your own perspectives and form your opinion, but there's never any prescription on a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Like personally for me, the most of my learnings have come from just implementing, getting feedback from other colleagues or customers directly, and then that is my validation on whether I've learned something or not, or whether I've like executed something well or not. So I try to focus a lot of my time on executing, but then also kind of updating my knowledge by reading. Like I have like a list of like the go-tos that I always go to when I'm looking for something.
Yeah.
And so I try to balance that out, but there is definitely FOMO. I think we can't avoid it with so much content coming out these days.
Yeah, because I mean, growth marketers have become like 20 jobs in one, right? People expect you to be like a neuropsychologist and also know about everything, design, UX, like CRO,
Yeah,
everything. And at some point, you just need to make peace of, well, first of all, focus what you keep up with and what you don't keep up with, and just understand that
correct.
there's like most of the value you can bring to the table. It's more on a level that is not about it's not about how you optimize your bidding in your ad, right? It's way more
Yeah,
strategic, the value that you can really bring in.
absolutely.
And that is not, that comes from experience. So I think that's a good part as well. But in a bit more like business pain related, you also mentioned like, and this one is really interesting for me because I've really struggled with this one, is like balancing short-term versus long-term
Hmm.
initiatives, right? Those things that are like just gonna bring in with the whole growth mindset, right? With glorified hacks and
Yeah,
experiments, you test quickly and you find that silver bullet that's going to like bring immediate results. Like when you join a new company, you want to bring results right away. That's like kind of something that's engraved in people's heads now. But long-term initiatives like that might not deliver immediate results are really, really key to achieving sustainable growth over time.
hmm.
When you've managed teams, how much of a pain has this been to like actually make this separation between the long-term things and the short-term things?
Yeah, it's been a big pain for sure. I think like I still don't have a solution for it, to be
Oh,
honest. I
thank
think it's an
God,
eternal
because I
dilemma.
don't either, and I thought you were gonna just like be amazing on it. Okay, good.
No, no, I think it's going to be an eternal dilemma because I honestly don't even know if there's like a right solution for something like this. I mean, you're always going to have to grow a business, especially in the nature of startups where, you need to achieve or you're looking to achieve 100% year on your growth. But at the same time, you want to like invest in things that compound over time and will bring you growth like the next year, right? So I
Yeah,
think it's an endless dilemma. One thing I think, depending on the stage of the startup, you can do is like figure out what your personal growth model should be, right? Like there are some startups that believe a lot in long-term growth strategies and their financing model is such as well, right? Where they may not raise massive amounts of capital, which means that they need to have more sustainable growth options.
yeah,
In these kinds of startups, I think it's easier to just go with the long term. Like don't be a marketer who joins a startup that has this sustainable mindset but wants to focus on the short term stuff, right? Because the nature of the business is such, and I'm sure the founders will be on the same page, that like you can invest in the longer term
yeah, yeah,
things and you should, right? If you're in a startup that has, is looking to grow very aggressively, I think a good way to balance that personally for me has been like figuring out how to spread out your resources, right? Like if you have limited internal full time resources, throw them towards like maybe the shorter term work or depending on the skills that they have, like assign short term work to them.
yeah,
And then figure out like if you can leverage freelancers or partners, to work with on the longer term solutions. So like keeping that balance so that you always have some folks working on short term initiatives and some working on long inside of your team, I think is like a good way to make sure you have both running, because I don't think you should neglect one over the other. It's really important to have long-term initiatives running while you're doing, like, for example, paid ads is like a super short-term thing, right? But it can give you massive growth in a very short span of time. And so maybe you would decide that investing in someone, a hire who does paid ads fully internally is a good call. But then I think you should also invest in someone who can work on content, whether that's a freelancer or whether that's internal, right? So then the content is kind of evergreen and builds up over time. So I think like just managing your talent and your resources to ensure that someone is working on the long term things or thinking about the long term things could be one way of like dealing with that.
yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's really interesting. There's a lot of like things to unpack there, and one of the things is that, um, with the whole experimentation mindset, as you said, like people, we have this idea. We tend to look for recipes, right? So we tend to look for things
Yeah.
that we can just repeat straight from a book into my work, and then I'll be successful. And one of those are experiments. So you see a lot of people debating about, for example, the difference between an experiment and a project. Yeah, well, an experiment is something way more scientific, right? And you put like your lab coat and you go in and you experiment. And the other one is like the boring stuff that you do, like keeping up with your social media or whatever it is, right? Like, do you do that
Yeah.
separation internally in your teams, or you treat every project equally, whether it's short or it's long, and everything kind of like flows in between, and it's not something that's so separately structured?
I would recommend like I personally like structured them in such a way that the starting with the goals, right? So for example, a long-term project has very different goals from a short-term experiment.
Yeah.
Like you can't expect like the same things of
But
them,
it
right?
has
And
goals,
so
right? That's really key. But it has
it
goals
does.
because people are like, yeah, but this is a
It
long
does.
term thing and we just have to do it, right?
No.
There needs to be a goal attached to it.
Absolutely. You're working towards something, right? And like thinking about that big picture and like looking at how it's going to span out over time and grow over time is really important.
Mm.
So I generally like to like segment that out and say, okay, for the longer term projects, why are we doing it? I think why are we doing it is really important. And that has to be backed by some kind of research and some numbers, right? So is there a specific reason for investing in this specific long term project? And if so, what are our goals split up by like Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 and the end of the year, right? Like, what is the long term target that you want to achieve? And how is the team going to measure themselves against that target, say, every quarter or every month? And I think it's important to have those goals because otherwise, what happens is you just do it and you lose sight of it. And, a year later, you might feel like, hey, this isn't really giving us the kind of impact. Why are we spending resources on this, right? So I like to definitely start by measuring or like stating the goals for longer term projects and for shorter term experiments as well, stating the goals. But I think it's important not to over engineer projects and, look too much at the numbers because
Yeah.
you need to learn how to quickly, just assess a few top level metrics and decide whether it's working or not working and move on to the next step.
Absolutely. And you touch upon an important topic, which is also the team structure, right? How you need to like
Hmm.
leverage freelancers. I mean, if you need to keep both things running and you have a small team, it's like 5 people or less. You
Yeah.
simply, I've tried everything around that setup, right? Like I've said, like, hey guys, for Mondays and Tuesdays, you're gonna run these experiments, and then the rest of the week we work on like all sorts of combinations. And it's just, as you said in the beginning, I don't think I've gotten correctly what the setup should be. But
Yeah.
from your experience, how would you structure a team? Do you prefer that there's a team that's like experimenting on short-term stuff that's completely separated from the team that does the longer-term stuff? Do you prefer to mix those up? How in your experience that has worked better for you?
Yeah, I think it's personally in my experience, I feel like it's best to keep them separate. Because what can happen is if you're having the same team member work on like a short term versus long term project, they can kind of feel really confused, right? Like and conflicted. Like what is expected of me? Like one, so if they're balancing, say, like a Google AdWords campaign along with like some other longer term project, it's very hard to like switch context between these two things. So just to give you an example, at ChargeBee, so within my growth team, there was a split up where we had two people working on community, right? And community is a very long term game.
Yeah.
Like you're building a community to have, it's going to build long term outcome and brand value over time, right? And so that team was entirely focused on that. And I felt like the results of that were great simply because they spent day in and day out thinking about like how do I build the best community for founders out there. And it's called Relay, and it's already seeing a lot of success. And then I had members of the team who were also working on shorter term projects which were going to like move the bottom line much faster, right? Or going to impact the bottom line much faster. And so I felt like that structure was really helpful because each person in the team had a clear idea on what it is that was expected of them and was able to like tweak their role to kind of match that.
Well, I also find that works well, fairly well when you have a small team, right? And you don't have like a designer for each one of those buckets or a developer for each one of those buckets, and you have to share
Yeah,
resources. What I've usually tried to
yeah.
do is that there's a side of the team that is a bit more, for lack of a better word, like focus on more like branding, right? So that they are more focused on like
Mhm.
long-term game, creating content all the time. And then there's another side of the team that's experimenting more in performance marketing. But what I find works
Right.
really well is that that performance marketing team doesn't request things from the other team for their experiments. They actually piggyback on the things the team has already created, right? Because
Hmm.
that releases your
Yeah.
designers or developers or whatever to keep working on the next stuff as this team leverages what they've already released. When you make that performance team request assets and request design and request whatever from that team like on real time as they experiment, then that other team never has the time to actually like,
To
yeah, to
focus.
write that 150-page ebook that they need to write, right? Because they're always going to be
Exactly.
delivering a creative for a display ad instead of like doing that, right? So to separate those two
Exactly. Yeah.
streams for me has worked well. I don't know if that's the case for you.
Absolutely. I think like if you have the luxury of being able to build out a larger team, then the way you structure it can kind of also just be based on the job functions that you build. For example, content marketing by nature is a much longer term play, but then within content marketing, you can have one person who's just focused purely on the blog and ebooks, and those are
Mm,
long pieces, right? Versus someone whose role it is to be like an enabler to sales
yeah.
and build like sales collateral and like a lot of these shorter term things that are going to like add to pipeline, right? Like webinar content and so on. So like hiring specialists for each of these roles, I think really helps because within each of those specialist roles are the KPIs that which are either like the short term or the long term KPIs, right? Depending on the role. So I think if you have that luxury to be able to build it out, then just the function or the role in itself takes
Yeah.
care of a lot of this.
All right, and point on this topic, right? I think one of the biggest issues I've seen in growth teams as well, and I've struggled with myself, is also scaling wins, right? Because you experiment, you get a little win here, a little win there, and then you're like, who makes
Hmm.
sure that this gets scaled and scaled and scaled for years to come, so we can keep leveraging that? You try to push that over to other teams. You say, hey, this works, so now you take care of it. Most often, things kind of like don't get scaled as they should, right? I found very little cases on which that's the case. Has that been a struggle for you as well, or is this something that you already feel like you've cracked?
No, I think this is a constant struggle. I think in terms of the scale, figuring out like who's going to scale it next. I think with growth teams, it's like we spoke about, because it's so collaborative. There's usually like, let's say you're running an experiment for onboarding in the product, right? And you see like some kind of positive results in that experiment. You need the product team, or like the ideal next step would be for the product team to take that little baby and then implement it inside the app and take it forward, right? And scale
Yeah.
it. But that can get conflicting now if you look at the KPIs, because product managers may be more focused on shipping specific features that customers are requesting,
Yep.
and not necessarily looking at your product onboarding hack,
Yep.
right? And so that's why I think this is a constant problem. But I think here is where there needs to be a lot of internal evangelism that has to happen. So a lot of my time at ChargeBee in this role was also spent on educating others inside of the organization on why a specific experiment that we were running, or the results of a specific experiment, was important, right? And getting that leadership buy-in, or getting like the your other peers to buy into that, kind of creates that excitement to say, hey, this is important, and they've already got like base results. Let's take it and take it forward. So I think from the growth leaders perspective, there has to be a lot of time and investment that goes into putting together the results of that experiment, and making sure that there's an owner to take it forward, and convincing and doing a good job of convincing everyone else inside the company, that
Yeah.
this thing deserves to be scaled.
Easier said than done, huh? That's a really tough
Definitely.
struggle.
this
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things, I'd say.
Yeah. Absolutely.
In having a growth
Building
position.
all those bridges, right? So that takes us to our last
Yeah.
pain of the day, which is measuring brand marketing efforts, right? I think that instead of going right away into like how you measure this and KPIs or so on, I think what's interesting is that this issue comes down to accepting that even though there are some ways of measuring the impact of brand initiatives, you should not expect the level of granularity that you can measure with your CPC campaigns, right? Like, because it's just simply not possible. If people in your organization expect that at the end of the quarter, you'll go, I can say with 100% certainty that these 20 deals came from this branding campaign, then you might need to set expectations before even discussing this, right? So have you dealt with like a team that demands this kind of granularity from every penny you spend in marketing, even when it's more branding related? And how have you dealt with that, or how much of a pain has it been?
Yeah. So first off, I think that clarity definitely needs to be there when you join any new startup team. If you're joining as a brand marketer or looking to scale a brand channel, because
Yeah.
I think you're set up for failure if your team or your manager expects that you're going to be able to see short-term results, right? Goes back to our short-term, long-term thing, right? So I think like we need to, as marketers, we need to accept that some things honestly can't be measured. I know this is a very unpopular
So many
opinion,
things. It's with
because
me. It's very popular. Give me more of that.
yeah, no, because I've heard so many people say that, oh, you can measure everything in marketing. I strongly disagree, because I think that things like a brand marketing cannot be measured, right? Like David Ogilvy wasn't able to like measure every ad campaign that he put out, but like,
They
Ogilvy had
worked.
some of the best ad campaigns in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we need to have other proxies. Like I'm not saying that as a brand marketer you shouldn't look at any kind of metrics, but you need to look at the right metrics that kind of indicate success. For example, if you're working on like a blog publication of sorts, you want to look at like how many people are actually talking about that and sharing it and valuing the content, right? Maybe leaving reviews even if you have that option, right? Versus actually looking at how many clicks and leads am I generating from this, onto my website. And I think if you do that, like if you approach content marketing as something as like generating a lot of short-term leads, you're not going to get the best content
No.
marketers on your
It's gonna
team
be
because they're going to
hacking.
want to
Yeah,
leave,
you're gonna be
right?
hacking SEO, the 10 things to do when, and it's gonna just be completely meh.
Exactly. Some of the best content marketers that I've worked with and I've seen have not necessarily, been focused on lead gen. In fact, their focus is just writing great content that's backed by research that everyone in their target market is going to read and talk about,
Yeah.
and that's what gives them happiness, right? So, as a manager, if you're going to demand leads from them, you're just going to, keep someone really unhappy in the role and they're going to leave. So I think it's really important as a marketing leader to again go back to what is your short-term activity and what is the long-term set of activities you want to run, and figure out like the KPIs for each of these and the type of people you need to run each of these. Because I think the type of people you hire for each of these different things are kind of remarkably different. And to
Yeah.
keep them happy and successful in the role, you need to understand that.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest pains when talking about this topic is the obsession people have with attribution, right? Because we should look at this much simpler. Like, I mean, if you start investing heavily in branding initiatives and 3 months in, We start seeing more inbound requests, shorter sales cycle, increased direct traffic, like more word of mouth. Like that should already be really good. But we cannot figure out accurately if things came from that. So people will say, well, we know that people love that video series you're making, but you've spent X. And what is the direct return from that? Which exact deals have come from that? Right. And in a
Yeah.
B2B environment, when there's so many offline and online touch points and people share printed things and they take screenshots of things, all of these things that you cannot
Yeah.
measure, that seems insane, right? Like you cannot say that something is not working because you don't see in your HubSpot setup that that deal came
Yeah.
directly from that video, right? Have you had to deal with that attribution obsession a little bit as well, or have you been a bit more lucky in that sense?
Oh no, I think I have definitely had to deal with it. I think I've been lucky enough to have worked with founders who kind of definitely believe in brand and like investing in brand. But I think there are times when you really have to like figure out like, okay, how am I able to kind of back up the claim that investing in a particular thing is important, right? And the question for like, okay, what data do we have to suggest that this thing is important is always there, right? And I've always experienced that. I think like a lot of these attribution tools and like attribution modeling can help with that in the sense that they help you or they want to help you be able to attribute where a lot of these leads are coming from. I just don't think we've cracked it yet. Like a lot of these
Yeah.
tools honestly haven't cracked it, right? Like if they're not able to track users across like Google or Facebook, they're not necessarily able, like how do you track whether your swag that you sent somebody is like reached another prospect in another location, right? It's like really hard through word
Yeah.
of mouth.
I mean,
So
honestly,
I think like,
yeah,
yeah,
part of me just hopes we never crack it, to be honest with you. Because when we can measure everything, we just go stupid. Like we're just like, hey, if I don't see direct ROI here, then I'm gonna kill the campaign. Like, and we stop just thinking like people.
yeah, absolutely. But I personally been kind of interested in figuring out like how can we build a model to measure something like content marketing? More scientific model. I still don't believe that you can measure everything, but I would still like to measure a lot more than what I've seen in the past being measured, right? So I do
Yeah,
think that there's opportunity for marketers to get a lot better with like piecing things together, like engagement data and things like that together to get better at this. But I do definitely don't think that we can like crack it to 100%.
yeah. Because what's interesting to me is that we seem so sure that performance marketing is being flawlessly measured, right? Because advertising platforms show us these fancy numbers there, so we see how many people.
Yeah,
But how many people are actually seeing an Instagram ad and just screenshotted it, like never interacted with it? How many people just saw it and told a friend about it? All things. How many
exactly.
people are like being blocked because they use all sorts of Chrome extensions on their browser, right? There's so many gaps, and we just love assuming that we have the absolute truth when we look at our metrics from a performance marketing campaign, right? And that's really not true.
Yeah,
And then we
yeah.
try to hold those standards to branding, and it gets even worse.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's so true. And like that sets you up for failure in the sense that you're not going to take on any of the other brand marketing stuff because you're going to want to always measure them and they're not going to give you that kind of insight,
Exactly.
right? And you'll then end up being a company that's only testing ads and only using paid marketing in these measurable channels, which I think in the long term you'll hit a growth ceiling. Like you need to have brand supplementing a lot of this to continue growing.
But this is interesting because I am a believer, and with this one we close up the topic, is that um, to build a truly unique brand, you need to have a certain portion of your marketing spend. Some people say 30%, 20%, whatever it is, that you don't put to such a heavy scrutiny as you put the other money that you spend.
Yes.
You just need to say, hey,
Yes.
this 200K, I'm going to spend them wildly. I'm going to try different things. I'm just going to go out of the comfort zone, and I will resist the temptation to scrutinize it like this is a PPC channel, right? I'm going to just be happy if the engagement is high, if people tell me that they love it, and that will be my success for this. That's obviously the worst possible thing you can tell a CFO. It will just sound like like hippie marketing bullshit. But have you been able to put this in practice, right? Have you been able to say, hey, this chunk of money, don't ask me what happened with it. I'm just going to spend it and try
Yes.
different things.
Yeah, at ChargeBee, definitely. I think, especially in my latest growth role, I think our co-founder embraced it in a way that it was like, okay, we're working on growth. Growth is really abstract. There are a lot of things going on. We don't know necessarily what it means. So take this budget and just test it out, and then come back with like data, right? So that when we say data, I don't mean like, oh, did this click, or like did the
Yeah.
person click on this ad, or did they, it's more like, okay, at a broad level, what is our perception of what, what like capital we invested. And so I did have that playground, but I know that everyone is not as lucky to have that playground.
Yeah.
It's important to try to address that with like your leadership or with your manager, when you're in a role like this, to make sure that you have some of that playground, because I think that really sparks creative freedom, right? Like it's going to help you figure out like how to fix
Yeah.
the brand problem in very creative ways.
Yeah, and there are so many things that are enjoyed that are not engaged with, right? Like I'm personally, I'm the kind of people that I enjoy a lot of stuff I see online, and I never put like on it because it's just not. I'm not like a clicking like kind of guy. So there's so much
Yeah.
positive impact that you're having and in people that you're not measuring, right? So I think you make a really solid point when you say have data, and yes, you need to have some data, but please do not ask me that I tell you that this exact dollar came from that exact other dollar that I put in, because that's when things just completely derail, right? Like I cannot get that
Yeah.
granular.
Yeah, and I think Chartmogul has also had a very similar kind of mindset where it's always been about like investing in building a brand. And so we've seen that like kind of work over time as well, where it's always been about providing value to customers and not necessarily scrutinizing every penny that's been spent. And I think that mindset is so important in building trust with customers, because that means you're going to put out like the best work and be focused on putting out the best work versus optimizing for every lead.
100%. All right, Karishma, it's been really, really fun, but the time has gone really quickly, so we need to start wrapping it up. Um, we asked the guests at the end to recommend some resources. So, do you have something for the audience that you would like to share?
Yeah, sure. I love listening to the How I Built This podcast on NPR. That's like one of my go-tos, because I feel like in that podcast, it's like you get a lot of diverse opinions. It's not always, founders in SaaS or founders in tech. Like you get a lot of interesting perspectives on how businesses are built.
Yeah,
And so it sparks like a lot of, creative thought. In terms of podcasts, I also love Planet Money.
I haven't heard that. No.
It's a great. Oh, it's a great economics podcast. So they again like cover a lot of like recent events in the world and kind of deconstruct, those different events. And I think the commentary on that podcast is just fantastic. And then I'd say like my other go-to resource within SaaS and within like management is First Round Review. Have you heard of First
Yeah,
Round's blog?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love their editing and I really like their stuff. I also have a background in behavioral science, so I love reading psychology books like, Dan Ariely,
Yeah,
Daniel Kahneman, and so on. Yeah, I love reading, like going back to the world of psychology and kind of, reading up what academics, like what perspectives academics have to offer.
that's super cool. Cool recommendations. I'm gonna keep in the podcast arena, and I'm gonna recommend. We were talking about mental health quite a bit at the beginning, so there's a Harvard Business Review podcast called The Anxious Achiever, which is really interesting because it's about anxiety and mental health in the workplace. I think that one it's super super interesting. I also recommended a similar one last episode, but I'm a bit hung up on this topic, so excuse me if you have listened to both of them. But that's it. It's been really really fun to have you. I feel like we could have spent so much more time speaking. I actually had to like kill a few questions I had there because, but hopefully maybe we can do another episode later on. It's been really really fun.
Absolutely. I've loved this conversation. I have to say it's been very different from the other podcasts I've done, but I
Good.
really thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for
The thing is,
having
I
me.
don't listen to that many podcasts, so I think when I did this, I didn't really follow a lot of the norm. But it's been great to have you, and hope you have a really fun ride at ChartMogul. Big fan of the product, and hopefully you guys do really well the coming year,
Thank you so
and then you
much.
can come back home to Toronto finally. Can you can take a flight back? All right,
Thank
everybody.
you so much. It's been great being on this.
Okay, bye everybody. Hope to see you for the next episode. Talk to you soon.
Growth Pains.